The tension had been building for weeks, but no one was brave enough to address it. The dinner table, once a place of warmth and laughter, had turned into a battlefield. Ha sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes flickering from her daughter to her son, then finally resting on Tan, her husband. The air was thick with unspoken words, the silence almost suffocating. Lan, Ha finally spoke, her voice cutting through the stillness. You know how important this family is. Why can't you ever just listen? I've given you everything. I've sacrificed so much, and you're out there doing whatever you want, disregarding everything we've worked for. Lan sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of frustration. You don't understand, Mom. I don't want to live the life you've planned for me. You don't let me make my own decisions. Tan, who had been silently watching the exchange, cleared his throat, his deep voice interrupting the conversation. Enough, Lan. You will respect your mother. You don't get to speak to her like that. Lan's face turned red. Why does everything always have to be about respect? Why can't you both just see that I am an adult now? I'm tired of being treated like a child. Ben, sitting quietly in the corner, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had never been good at conflict, but even he could feel the tension between his sister and their parents. It was always the same with Lan, nothing ever seemed good enough for her. He glanced at his mother, who was now looking down at her plate, her lips tightly pressed together. Ha's expression was unreadable, but Ben could feel the weight of the years of unspoken pain she had carried. He had never understood the depth of his mother's expectations, but he had always tried to live up to them. He had tried to be the good son, the one who followed the rules, who made his parents proud. But he couldn't help but feel that no matter what he did, it was never enough. The next day, after the tension had cooled, David decided to have a private conversation with Lan. He had been quiet during the dinner, but now, with the house empty and just the two of them sitting in the living room, it was time to talk. Lan, David said, his voice calm but firm, I want you to understand something. We've spent our lives trying to provide for you, to give you everything we never had. And you seem to disregard everything we've done for you. Lan turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. You don't get it, Dad. You and Mom have never let me make my own choices. You've always controlled my life. It's suffocating. David sighed. He had never been one to show vulnerability, but for the first time, he saw a flicker of pain in his daughter's eyes. I know we've made mistakes. But it's because we love you, Lan. We've always wanted the best for you. Lan's voice softened, but the frustration was still there. I know you love me. But I need to live my life, not the life you think is best for me. I don't want to just be the person you want me to be. I want to be me. David looked at her for a long moment, his mind racing. He had always tried to control his children's future, to protect them from making the same mistakes he had made. But now, as he looked at his daughter, he realized that perhaps he had done the very thing he had hoped to avoid. He had stifled her growth, her individuality. I didn't mean to stifle you, Lan, David finally said, his voice softer. I just wanted to protect you. But I see now that you need space to grow on your own terms. Lan's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I need to figure this out for myself, Dad. I just need you to trust me. David felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time, he was truly seeing his daughter for who she was, her own person, not just a reflection of his hopes and expectations. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew this. If he could give her the space she needed, she would find her own path. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of calm in the Miller household. The tension that had once filled every corner of the house began to fade, replaced by a more peaceful, understanding atmosphere. Lan, who had once felt suffocated by the expectations of her parents, was now beginning to carve out her own space in the world. Her decision to apply for colleges far from home had been the first step in reclaiming her autonomy, and David, despite his initial resistance, was slowly learning to give her the space she needed. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, of second-guessing, especially from Ha and Tan, who had spent years shaping their lives around their children's needs. But for the first time, they began to see that Lan wasn't rejecting them, she was simply trying to find herself. One weekend, Lan came to visit. It had been a while since she had spent time with her family. She sat down with David and Sarah, a slight nervousness in her posture, but she was ready to talk. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice softer than usual. "I know we've had our differences. I know I've hurt you both with my decisions, and I'm sorry. But I want you to know that I'm doing this for me, not because I don't love you." David looked at her, his heart heavy with a mix of regret and hope. "Lan," he said quietly, "we've made mistakes. Both of us. And we've tried our best. But we need to understand something, that you're growing, and with that comes change. We just want to be here for you. We don't want to lose you." Lan smiled softly, her eyes moistening. "You won't lose me, Dad. I've just had to find my own way. But I still need you both. I always will." The room fell silent for a moment, but this time, the silence was different. It wasn't tense. It was filled with understanding. Sarah reached over, taking Lan's hand in hers. "You don't have to apologize, sweetheart. We've always wanted you to be happy, even if we didn't always know how to show it." Lan squeezed Sarah's hand. "I know. I've just been afraid of disappointing you. But I think I've learned that I can still make my own choices and still be part of this family. I just needed to believe that you'd still love me, no matter what." David nodded, his throat tight. "You are our daughter, Lan. Nothing will ever change that. We love you, and we're proud of you, no matter where life takes you." For the first time in a long time, Lan felt like she could breathe. The weight she had carried for so long, the fear of disappointing her parents, the pressure to live up to expectations, began to lift. In that moment, she realized that love was not about perfection. It was about understanding, acceptance, and the willingness to grow together, even when paths diverged. The following weeks were filled with small but meaningful steps. Lan continued her preparations to leave for college, but now she felt a sense of peace. She had her parents' support, and though she was still nervous about the future, she no longer felt the weight of expectation crushing her spirit. David and Sarah had learned to respect her need for independence, and in return, Lan felt more connected to them than ever before. One evening, as David and Sarah sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky, David spoke softly. "You know, I think this is the happiest I've been in a long time," he said. Sarah smiled, leaning against him. "Me too. It's not perfect, but it's real. And we're here. Together." David nodded, the weight of years of tension finally lifting. They had weathered storms, both together and separately, but now, for the first time in a long time, they could breathe easy. The road ahead would not be free from challenges, but they knew that as long as they walked it together, they would be okay. And with that thought, David realized that the family they had worked so hard to build was stronger than ever. Love had been their foundation, and it would continue to guide them no matter where life took them. As the months passed, the Miller family began to embrace a new chapter. Lan had settled into her new life at college, and while it wasn't always easy, she had found a rhythm that worked for her. She kept in regular touch with her parents, sharing stories of her life, her new experiences, and the friendships she was forming. There were still moments of homesickness, but she no longer felt the pressure of trying to meet expectations that didn't align with who she was. David and Sarah, too, had adapted to the changes. With Lan away at college, the house had become quieter, but there was a sense of peace in the stillness. They had more time for each other, and although they missed their children, they also found joy in the quiet moments of their own lives. It wasn't the life they had envisioned when they first became parents, but it was one they had learned to appreciate. One afternoon, Sarah suggested that they take a trip together, just the two of them. It had been years since they had gone away without the children, and she felt it was time to reconnect with each other in a new way. David agreed, and soon they were on a plane heading to a quiet coastal town, far from the hustle and bustle of their daily lives. The trip was everything they needed. They spent their days exploring the town, walking along the beach, and talking about everything and nothing. They rediscovered the joy of being in each other's company, of simply enjoying the present without the pressures of daily life. It was a reminder of the love they had built and the foundation they had laid together for their family. On the last day of the trip, as they sat on the beach watching the sunset, Sarah turned to David, a smile on her face. "I think we've earned this," she said, her voice filled with contentment. "We've worked hard for this peace, for this quiet. It's not perfect, but it's ours." David smiled back, his heart full. "We've earned more than this, Sarah. We've earned the love and respect of our children, the trust we've built, and the life we've shared." They sat together in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. It was a moment of reflection, of peace, and of gratitude for all that they had built together. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. The years ahead were filled with moments of joy and challenge. Lan continued her journey at college, growing more confident in her decisions and her future. David and Sarah, though no longer the young parents they once were, embraced the changes and found joy in watching their children succeed. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, David and Sarah reflected on their journey. It had been a long road, full of ups and downs, but they had reached a place of peace. "We've done well," David said, his voice content. Sarah nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "We have. And we'll continue to. Together." As the stars twinkled above them, they realized that the greatest gift of all had been the love they had shared and the family they had created. No matter where the road ahead took them, they knew they would walk it together. As the years unfolded, David and Sarah found themselves in a peaceful yet fulfilling phase of their lives. Their children, though independent and building their own lives, remained close. They visited regularly, sharing stories of their journeys, their successes, and their challenges. The family bond, though tested, was stronger than ever. One day, as they sat around the dinner table, David looked around at his family. Lan was home for the weekend, sharing her college experiences. Ben, who had finished his studies and started working in the city, was there too. Sarah, as always, had made a delicious meal and the warm aroma filled the room. "Do you remember when we used to fight about everything?" Lan asked with a smile. "It feels like a lifetime ago." David laughed, glancing at Sarah. "Yes, I do. It was exhausting, but necessary." Lan raised an eyebrow. "Necessary?" David nodded thoughtfully. "It was through those struggles that we learned to listen to each other. We might not have always agreed, but we found a way to respect each other's differences. That's how we grew." Sarah reached across the table, taking David's hand. "And that's what I love about us. We never gave up on each other." Ben, who had been quietly listening, looked up from his plate. "I think that's the key, isn't it? Not giving up. No matter what happens, we always came back together." David smiled at his son. "Exactly. And that's why I'm so proud of the people you've both become. Not because you're perfect, but because you've learned to grow and love, despite everything." There was a moment of silence as the family took in David's words. The love that had been built over the years, though imperfect, had formed a solid foundation. It wasn't just about the happy moments, it was about how they had weathered the storms together. Later that evening, when the table had been cleared and the house had quieted down, David and Sarah sat together on the couch. For the first time in a while, they had some time alone to reflect on their journey. "We've made it, haven't we?" Sarah said softly, her head resting on David's shoulder. David kissed her forehead gently. "We've made it through everything, and we've built something beautiful along the way." They sat in peaceful silence, knowing that the future still held its uncertainties. But they were no longer afraid of the unknown. They had faced so much together, and now, in this chapter of their lives, they knew that love, trust, and family were all that mattered. As the years continued to pass, David and Sarah found themselves in a new chapter of life. The children had grown up, established their own careers, and started their own families. Yet, the bond between David and Sarah remained as strong as ever. They had created something beautiful, something that would last through time. One day, as they sat together looking at old family photographs, Sarah turned to David and said, "We've done well, haven't we?" David smiled, his heart full. "Yes, we have. And we will continue to. Together." They didn't know what the future would bring, but they knew they would face it side by side, with the same love and trust that had carried them through the years. And no matter what came next, they would always have each other. The road ahead might be uncertain, but David and Sarah knew one thing for sure: their journey was far from over. It had only just begun. As David and Sarah continued their journey together, life didn't always stay calm. The quiet moments were precious, but the truth was, challenges still came their way. One such challenge came when Lan, now an adult, came to visit one afternoon with news that would shake their already delicate family dynamics. Lan had been thriving in college, finding her own place in the world. However, a visit to a nearby town had rekindled a memory she thought she had left behind: the relationship with a man from her past. This man had been a part of her life during her late teens, someone she had fallen deeply in love with. Their relationship had ended abruptly, largely due to her parents' disapproval. At the time, they had insisted that she focus on her studies, that her future should not be distracted by fleeting emotions. It had hurt her deeply. Now, years later, the man had reappeared. He had grown, changed, and was a much different person than the young man she once knew. And Lan, after much contemplation, had decided to give their relationship another chance. The conversation that followed was tense. Lan, full of emotions, tried to explain to her parents how important this decision was for her. She spoke about the time she had lost with this man, the love they once shared, and how she felt that this was an opportunity for both of them to rewrite their story. "I know you both might not understand," Lan said, her voice shaky but determined. "But this is something I need to do. I can't keep living with the regret of not giving him another chance. I need to be true to myself." David's heart was heavy. The pain in Lan's voice reminded him of the struggles he and Sarah had gone through with their own mistakes. He knew how much his daughter had suffered over the years, and yet, the idea of her returning to someone who had once hurt her seemed unfathomable. "You don't have to do this, Lan," David said, his voice a mixture of concern and sadness. "There are so many good men in this world. Why go back to someone who might hurt you again?" Lan's eyes filled with tears. "Because I believe people can change. Because I believe in second chances, and I need to give him one. I'm not the same person I was when we first broke up. Neither is he." Sarah, who had been quiet until now, took a deep breath. "We want you to be happy, Lan," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "But you have to understand that we are concerned for you. We want to protect you from getting hurt again." Lan nodded, wiping her tears. "I know. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I just want you to trust that I've thought this through. I'm not a little girl anymore. I'm an adult, and I need to make my own choices." The silence that followed was thick. David and Sarah exchanged looks, both unsure of how to handle the situation. The pain in their daughter's eyes, mixed with the determination she had in her voice, left them torn. This wasn't easy, but they knew they couldn't control her decisions anymore. David finally sighed, a weight lifting from his chest. "Lan, I can't promise I won't worry. I can't promise I won't be scared. But I can promise that I will support you no matter what. This is your life. Your choice." Lan smiled softly, tears still in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom." The weeks that followed were filled with quiet reflection. The atmosphere at home had shifted, not just in the way they interacted with Lan, but also in how David and Sarah viewed their own relationship. The weight of their decisions had always loomed large in their minds, but now they were beginning to see the power of forgiveness, not just between themselves and their daughter, but within their own hearts as well. Lan had gone on to meet the man from her past, And though her parents still had their doubts, they saw that she was committed to making her own choices. They didn't have to agree with everything she did, but they were learning to respect her decisions. And as time passed, they began to realize something else. Their relationship with Lan, though complicated and filled with tension, was ultimately built on a foundation of love and trust. One evening, David and Sarah sat in their living room, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The house was quiet, Lan was at school, and Ben had gone back to the city. David broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. I think I've spent so many years thinking I needed to protect our family by controlling everything, by making sure everyone followed my rules. But now I see that sometimes letting go is the best thing we can do. Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with understanding. It's hard, David. Letting go means trusting. And trust is not easy when you love someone so much. David nodded, his gaze drifting toward the window. I've always been afraid of what might happen if I let go, if I allowed Lan and Ben to make their own choices. But I see now that they are not my possessions. They're individuals with their own lives to lead. I can guide them, love them, but I can't control them. Sarah reached out, gently touching his hand. That's the hardest part for any parent, isn't it? The realization that your children must find their own path, even if it's different from what you envisioned. David looked down at their hands, clasped together. I wish I had learned that sooner. I spent so many years trying to hold on to something that was never mine to control. But now, I see that what we have, our family, our love, is enough. I don't need to control every step they take. I just need to be there when they need me. Sarah smiled softly, squeezing his hand. You've always been there for them, David. And I know you always will be. In the months that followed, David and Sarah began to embrace a new freedom. They took more time for themselves, exploring new hobbies and enjoying their quiet time together. They found that, though the house was quieter, it was filled with a sense of peace that had been missing for years. They had given their children the space to grow and make their own choices, and in return, they had found new joy in their own lives. Lan's relationship with her parents continued to improve, though it was still a journey. She would call home often, sharing updates on her life and occasionally seeking advice from her mother. Though she was forging her own path, she knew that her parents' love and support were still there, always. And in many ways, this gave her the confidence to continue building her life, knowing that she had a strong foundation behind her. One evening, as David and Sarah sat on their porch, watching the stars twinkle above, David spoke quietly, his voice filled with contentment. You know, this piece, it feels right, he said. We've come a long way, and while the future is still uncertain, I feel like we're exactly where we need to be. Sarah smiled, her hand in his. I feel the same way. It's not about having everything figured out. It's about knowing that we have each other. David nodded, the weight of years of tension and uncertainty lifting from his shoulders. He had learned to let go, to trust, and most importantly, to love without condition. And in that moment, as they sat together, he knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. The years continued to pass, but the lessons David and Sarah had learned remained deeply embedded in their hearts. The house, though quieter than it had been during the chaotic years of raising children, was filled with a warmth that had come from years of shared experiences and unconditional love. Lan, now fully independent, had returned to visit more often. Though her relationship with her parents had been complicated, she had learned the art of balancing independence with family connection. David and Sarah could see that she had blossomed into a woman who was not only confident in her decisions, but also respectful of the love that her parents continued to offer her. One evening, as Lan sat at the dinner table with David and Sarah, she smiled to herself as she looked around at the family she had once felt stifled by. Now it was the place she longed to return to reconnect and share her life with the people who had shaped her. You know, Lan said, breaking the comfortable silence, I've been thinking about all the years I spent running from you both. I thought I needed to find my own way by separating from everything you stood for, but I see now that I was wrong. David and Sarah exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. They had always known that their relationship with Lan wasn't over, it was simply evolving. The years of tension had made them all stronger, and now they were learning to build a new kind of bond, one built on mutual respect and understanding. "You don't need to apologize, Lan," Sarah said softly, her voice gentle but full of warmth. "We've all made mistakes. But I'm just happy you're here and that you're in a place where you feel free to be yourself." Lan smiled, her eyes welling up with emotion. "I think that's what I've always wanted, to be accepted for who I am, not who I was supposed to be. And now I realize that the love you've always had for me has never wavered. It's the foundation I needed to build the life I have now." David, moved by her words, reached across the table to take her hand. "We've always loved you, Lan. And we always will. There's nothing you can do to change that." With the passing of time, the family grew closer, not just through shared memories, but through a deeper understanding of one another. David and Sarah had learned to let go in many ways, but they also discovered that letting go didn't mean losing. It meant making space for growth, both in themselves and in their children. The path that had once seemed fraught with tension and uncertainty was now one they walked together, side by side. Lan, having reconciled with her parents, continued to flourish in her own life, but she knew that the roots of her strength were in her family. No matter how far she went, no matter how different their paths became, she carried that love with her. David and Sarah found joy in their later years, not just as parents, but as partners in the truest sense of the word. They had built something together, something that wasn't perfect but was full of life, full of love. And now, as they entered this new phase of life, they did so with the same spirit of collaboration and love that had always marked their relationship. One evening, David and Sarah took a walk through the old neighborhood where they had first met. The streets had changed, but the memories they had created there remained. They walked hand in hand, savoring the quiet, savoring the beauty of the life they had built. "You know," David said softly, "I think I understand now. The things we've been through, the struggles, the misunderstandings, they were all a part of making us who we are today." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "Yes, David. And all of it, good and bad, has been worth it." They stopped by a park bench, a spot where they had sat years ago, dreaming of their future. Now, as they sat together again, they looked back on the journey they had taken. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been real. David took Sarah's hand in his and said, "Here's to whatever comes next." Sarah leaned against him, her heart full. Together. And with that, they knew their journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. As the seasons continued to change, so did the chapters of David and Sarah's life. With their children thriving and building their own futures, David and Sarah found themselves with more time to focus on each other and the world they had built together. The years had taught them many lessons, but perhaps the most profound one was the importance of being present, not just for their children, but for each other. One morning, as they sat on the porch sipping their coffee, Sarah looked over at David and smiled. "I think we've come a long way, haven't we?" David nodded, his eyes warm with affection. "We have. And I think we're still growing even now." The silence that followed was peaceful, and for a moment, neither of them needed to say anything more. They had come to understand that the beauty of their life wasn't just in the milestones they had reached, but in the quiet moments they shared. As the day went on, they decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. It was a perfect spring morning, with the sun shining and the air crisp and fresh. The streets were alive with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting, but David and Sarah found peace in the simple act of walking together. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with nostalgia. David smiled. "I do. It feels like a lifetime ago, but in some ways, it feels like just yesterday." They walked in silence for a while, taking in the familiar sights of their neighborhood, the park where they had spent so many afternoons with Lan and Ben, the old oak tree in front of the house where they had watched their children play. "Sometimes I think about all the years we've had together," Sarah said softly. "The good times, the hard times. It's all shaped us into who we are today." David nodded. "And I wouldn't change any of it. Even the hard times, they've made us stronger and they've made us appreciate the good times even more." As they reached the end of the street, Sarah paused and turned to David. "I think we've built something truly beautiful. And I'm proud of what we've created together." David looked at her, his heart full. "Me too. And I'm grateful for every moment of it." One afternoon, as David was sitting in the garden, reading a book, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had led him to this moment. The years of struggle, of mistakes and redemption had been worth it. They had shaped him, molded him into someone who could appreciate the quiet moments, the small victories, and the love that surrounded him. Sarah came out into the garden and sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his. She had always been his anchor, the steady force in his life. He turned to her, smiling. "I'm so grateful for you," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. Sarah smiled back, her eyes warm. "We've been through so much together, David. But in the end, it was all worth it, wasn't it?" David nodded. "It was. And I think we've built something that will last. We've created a life, a love, a family. And nothing can take that away." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We've done well, haven't we?" David squeezed back, a tear escaping his eye. "Yes, we have." They sat in silence, knowing that the future was still uncertain. But they had built a foundation that would carry them through whatever came next. Their journey, filled with its ups and downs, had come to a place of peace. And for the first time in a long while, they could both say with certainty they were ready for whatever came next. As David and Sarah moved forward into the next phase of their lives, they realized that the journey they had taken together had prepared them for what was to come. The years of raising children, navigating challenges, and learning to love each other in the most honest and genuine ways had given them a solid foundation. But now it was time to embrace the future in a new way, without the pressure of expectation, but with a sense of possibility. Lan had graduated from college and found a job in a city a few hours away. She was now living on her own, fully independent, but always checking in with her parents, sharing the highs and lows of her new life. David and Sarah had grown accustomed to the quieter house, but it didn't feel lonely. They found joy in the time they spent together, whether it was working on projects around the house or simply enjoying a quiet evening at home. One Saturday morning, they sat in the kitchen, sipping their coffee as the sun streamed through the windows. Sarah broke the silence, her voice gentle but thoughtful. "You know, David, I've been thinking," she began, her gaze distant for a moment. "We've given our children the freedom to live their lives. But I think it's time for us to do something just for us. Something we've always wanted to do but never had the chance." David looked up from his coffee, his curiosity piqued. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe we should take a trip. Go somewhere we've never been. Just the two of us. Explore the world a little." David laughed softly, the idea catching him off guard, but filling him with excitement. "That sounds wonderful. I think it's time for us to make some new memories together, just the two of us." And with that, they began to plan their adventure. The idea of exploring a new place, just the two of them, excited both of them in ways they hadn't expected. It was a reminder that even in the later years of life, there was still so much to experience. They didn't need a specific reason or a grand occasion. The joy was in the journey itself. David and Sarah's trip turned out to be everything they had hoped for and more. They explored new cities, tried new foods, and took long walks through streets they had never seen before. They laughed, reminisced, and found themselves falling in love with each other again, in ways they hadn't expected. It was as though the years of parenting, the struggles, and even the distance between them had only deepened their connection, making this time together even more meaningful. It wasn't just about the places they visited. It was about the shared moments, the quiet mornings in small cafes, the afternoons spent wandering aimlessly, and the evenings watching the sunset together. These simple moments reminded them that life, in all its unpredictability, could be beautiful, even in its later stages. The trip didn't just strengthen their bond as a couple, it also gave them new perspective on their family. Lan had found her own path, and though they still had their concerns, David and Sarah were proud of the woman she had become. Ben, too, was thriving in his own way, navigating his career and personal life with a sense of purpose. When they returned home, they felt refreshed, ready to take on the next chapter of their lives, whatever it might bring. The house was still quiet, but it was full of possibilities. They had given themselves the freedom to grow, to explore, and to embrace new experiences. And in doing so, they had reaffirmed the love that had brought them this far. As David and Sarah entered the twilight years of their lives, they realized that the essence of their relationship was not defined by any one phase or milestone. It was built on the love and respect they had nurtured over the years. They had weathered storms, celebrated victories, and supported each other through every change. But the love that had sustained them all these years was more than just a bond. It was a living, breathing connection that had only deepened with time. Their family, though spread out now, Lan in her city, Ben in his own life, remained a constant source of joy and fulfillment. Every phone call, every visit was a reminder that their children were flourishing, carving out their own paths, but always coming back to the foundation their parents had given them. The ties that bound them were not just geographical, they were emotional, rooted in the love and sacrifices made over the years. One crisp autumn day, as David and Sarah sat together on their porch, watching the leaves fall gently from the trees, they reflected on the journey they had taken. They had always known that the world was full of uncertainties, but they had found strength in the certainty of each other's presence. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Sarah asked, her voice soft with contemplation. David smiled, his hand reaching out to take hers. "All the time. And I'm proud of what we've built. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And that makes all the difference." Sarah leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "It's been a life well lived, hasn't it?" "Yes," David whispered. "And there's still so much more to live." They sat there for a while, in quiet contentment. The future might still be uncertain, but they knew they would face it together, hand in hand. No matter how many more years they had ahead of them, they were ready to live each day to the fullest, with love as their guide. In the years that followed, David and Sarah continued to grow together, hand in hand, their lives filled with quiet joy and profound love. They spent time with their children, who continued to make their own choices, knowing that they were supported, loved, and respected. Their home, though quieter than before, was still filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, and love. David and Sarah also began to explore new passions. They took up painting together, finding peace in the strokes of their brushes. They planted a garden in their backyard, spending hours together nurturing the flowers, watching them bloom. It was a way to continue creating something beautiful, even as the years advanced. As they grew older, the simple joys of life became even more meaningful. They had learned to appreciate every moment, knowing that time was a gift that they should never take for granted. The years had taught them that love was not just about grand gestures, but about the quiet moments of connection, the small acts of kindness, and the shared laughter. One day, sitting on the porch again, watching the sunset together, David turned to Sarah and said, "I never thought we'd be here, you know?" Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the day. "I did. I always knew we'd get here. Together." David nodded, his heart full of love. Together. As time continued its inevitable march forward, David and Sarah grew older. Their bodies changed, and the years took their toll in subtle ways. Yet, their bond remained as strong as ever. In fact, as they entered the later years of their lives, their love had only deepened. They had come to realize that the most important thing in life wasn't about the years they had lived, but about how they had lived those years. Their children, now with families of their own, continued to visit as often as they could, their homes filled with the laughter of grandchildren. The family dinners, once a scene of chaos and noise, had become more intimate, with shared memories and quiet conversations. David and Sarah found joy in watching their children and grandchildren grow, knowing that the foundation they had built was still standing strong. One day, as they sat together in the living room, Sarah looked over at David, her eyes soft with years of love. "Do you ever think about the future, David?" she asked, her voice calm, yet tinged with a sense of quiet reflection. David smiled, looking back at her. "I do, Sarah. But not in the way I used to. When we were younger, I worried about everything, the future, our children, the house, the job. But now I think about the love we've shared, the family we've created, and how much we've been through together. And I realize the future is just another chapter. Whatever comes next, we'll face it the way we've faced everything else together." Sarah reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're right. We've been through so much. But we've also built something so beautiful, David. Something that will last long after we're gone." David nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "We have, Sarah. And I'm at peace with it. I'm at peace with us." Years passed, and the inevitable came. David's health began to decline. He and Sarah knew that time, as it always does, was running out. But instead of fearing it, they embraced it with the same grace and courage they had faced all the challenges of their lives. They spent their days together, reminiscing about their journey, reflecting on their memories, and cherishing the quiet moments of their remaining time. Lon and Ben, now both adults with families of their own, visited frequently. Their children, David and Sarah's grandchildren, brought new life into the home, filling it with energy and joy. Though David's health had begun to fade, his love for his family had only grown stronger. He and Sarah watched their children, their grandchildren, and they knew that their legacy of love would continue long after they were gone. One evening, as David sat in his favorite chair, Sarah beside him, he took her hand in his voice soft but filled with love. "Sarah, we've had a good life, haven't we?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. She smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "We've had a wonderful life, David." "A full life." David nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm so grateful for everything we've shared, for every moment, for you." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I'm grateful for you, David. You've been my everything, my love, my partner, my best friend." David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the years, the love, and the peace. As he looked at Sarah, he knew that even though their time together on Earth was nearing its end, their love would never fade. It would live on in the hearts of their children, their grandchildren, and in the memories of the life they had built together. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice filled with the depth of a lifetime's worth of love. "I love you too, David," she whispered back, her heart full. And in that moment, as the world continued to turn, David and Sarah found peace, knowing that their love had transcended time and it would continue to live on forever.